stories are part of what makes us tick as humans, and I want you to use them as often as possible. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about the framework that's really simple to use, and we're going to get into it as we go. And one of the things we're going to look at is this book, What Great Salespeople Do. All right, in this video, we're going to talk about the power of stories and how to use them really to reframe a conversation. We're going to use them as a tool for paraphrasing. But to kick it off, I want to just share you a little bit of backstory about stories, I guess. Humans, we are hardwired. We're storytellers. You think about ancient Egypt, hieroglyphics, they were telling a story. Every great book that's been written tells a story. Nobody wants to read a book that says, first chapter, everything's fine. Second chapter, everything's fine. And third and fourth and five and six, everything's just fine. It has to have some kind of interest, some intrigue. I was watching a video by a guy named Oren Klaff, who wrote the book Pitch Anything, and he was talking about just reframing our pitches to have a setup for the story, creating some intrigue and a reveal at the end. So I really want you to think about, when you're speaking, when you're communicating with somebody, how can you integrate stories? Now, there's a bunch of different stories you can tell. You can tell your story about why you're in this business, why you're here today. You can tell somebody else's story. You can help your customer pull the story out from them. You can tell stories about your product. You can tell personal stories. You can tell the company story. There's lots of, you can tell your why. There's just so many ways to use stories to communicate better than, as we've talked about so many times, just beating people over the head with features and benefits. Stories are part of what makes us tick as humans, and I want you to use them as often as possible. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about the framework that's really simple to use, and we're going to get into it as we go. And one of the things we're going to look at is this book, What Great Salespeople Do. I actually met the guy who wrote this book. Really cool guy, very connected, as a humanist approach to things. And it's something that I think is really valuable, to think in terms of stories and to communicate in terms of stories. So let's go into it and get this thing kicked off. Okay, so let's talk about the power of stories. Like I said, we're going to be focusing more on sort of the thought process around storytelling and how you can apply it for reframing conversations. So let's talk. The first thing, stories are here to help build trust. People are always asking this. Do I trust this person, or are they like every other salesperson? So you have to find ways to connect. You have to get them to know, like, and trust you. And storytelling is a really good way to do it. When we are telling stories, here's a couple really cool things that are happening in our brain, or what's happening in the customer's brain. One, neural coupling, which is basically when I'm listening to this story, I'm now becoming like the people in the story. So the more closely you can align your story to the person you're telling it to, the more that neural coupling is going to kick in. The other thing that it does is it allows us to mirror. So whatever I'm feeling, if we want to build our empathy skills, I'm going to tell a story, and they're going to start to mirror my body language. So our pacing, our tonality, our articulation, our pitch, everything that we're doing, they're going to start to feel what we're feeling. So it's a really good way to empathize with the person that's telling and listening to the story. Dopamine. When we're telling a story, we're getting people excited. We start to create some intrigue in their mind. That dopamine spike is going to now make it easier for them to remember any details, facts, figures that we share. And then the other part here, the cortex activity, I remember reading this, the Broca's and Wernicke's area. If you do it well, I don't remember if you ever have been falling asleep, and as you're starting to drift off, your leg twitches. That's because your brain is thinking about moving, right? So what's happening is sensory, frontal cortex, motor, it's all going to fire when you tell a good story. If somebody's telling you a story about a harrowing, they're looking over the cliff and they're going to dive, you're going to have a dopamine spike, but you're also going to have a physical sensation if the story's told well. Probably not as good as what I did, but there you go. Now, when we talk about story structure, what we're trying to do is move people away from that, that neocortex, that logic side, to the right side of the brain, the artistic, the memory, the associative context. So what we're trying to do is, to do it, we say, can we tell a story? Can I tell you a story? You can use this when you're reframing. Can I tell you what I think your story is? You're helping people kind of go, and move away from an evaluation mode to an open mode, because when you're hearing a story, you're not trying to evaluate the story. You go into listening mode. So using this to help lead into a story is really, really powerful. So there's lots of ways that stories are built. And if you look at them, they follow a pretty standard process. They go like this, and then they go up, and then they go down. So they start with something, there's some kind of tension that builds, there's some kind of major event, and then the denouement or the resolution. If you look at there's Hero's Journey, which has a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on, just different versions of stories, and it's explained in a lot of different ways. And so what we want to do is, when I looked at this book, this was probably the easiest way to apply story structure to what we're doing. And there's 4 parts to it, and it looks like this. So we got to say, okay, what's the point of me telling this story? So when you're thinking about using stories, there's a couple things you can use this for. Let's say you're going to tell a testimonial or a case study or social proof. First, you want to know, is this the right segmented case study that I'm using? Is this the right, does this person relate to this story that I'm telling? The other part is, does this person relate to the situation that I'm telling it about? If I'm trying to get somebody to just simply book an appointment and they're being resistant to that, the story that I'm going to tell is not going to be how I help somebody win, 5 years into our relationship. I might say, hey, you know what? You remind me of somebody that I met a while back and they were really nervous to book an appointment. So here's what we got started with. That's what the story will be to help them solve that specific challenge for that type of person. So the first thing we wanted to ask, we shouldn't tell a story unless there's a point behind it. So every story you tell should follow this kind of format. There's a situation, right? And the situation, we want to be able to describe who's involved, what they're dealing with, what's happening, so that the person listening goes, oh, that sounds like me. That sounds like something I'm familiar with. Or at least you put it into context so they go, oh, that's relatable, okay? Then there's going to be a complication. Complications can be challenges. Complication can be goals, opportunities. What am I trying to solve? Here's the thing I'm wrestling with that I want to get through. And then we're going to get to the turning point or the aha. If we could just find a way to do this, then we'll be able to do this. And then there's that resolution and the denouement. And then we're going to say, have I missed anything? So let me put this into context for you. If I am using my conversation roadmap in the loop selling sort of thought process, I'm going to get to a point where I ask them lots of questions. I understand their scenarios. I understand what's going on in their world, their situations. I understand the challenges they're trying to do, the goals that they're trying to get to, the reality they're trying to create, the emotions they're trying to build out, how my offer is going to uniquely sell them or help them solve these problems. I'm going to empathize with them. I'm going to understand how I need to communicate this, and I'm going to have maybe shared some stories with them along the way. Now I'm going to get to a point where I want to reframe my conversation. Okay. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to say to them, can I tell your story back to you real quick in case I have missed anything? And what are they going to say? Sure. So I'm going to say, okay, in your business, let's say I'm selling sales consulting. In your business, it seems like you've got a team that's working really, really well, and you guys have done great over the past year to go from here to here, right? And they go, yeah, and they're nodding along, so we're looking for that nodding along the agreement. Say, but the challenge you've had is that without standard processes, you guys have kind of had everybody doing a bit of their own thing, and there's nothing that you've been able to find for like specific measurements to be able to track and improve and grow into the next level, but you got some really great people. So what we want to do in the turning point is to find a way to take what you've done that's amazing, systemize it, build some tools, build some things that we can repeat to give your team a little bit more bandwidth so that we can do some higher level coaching and training to help them scale. And you can start to now add more people to your team because it's predictable, right? And I'm going to nod and say, great. So that means if we do something like that over the next 3 months to 6 months, you're now going to be in a position where you can start to onboard people quickly. You can start to scale your business. You can have predictability because now you can focus on what your systems and your processes can do, and people are going to settle in. They're going to be able to scale and grow faster. Now, have I missed anything of what you're trying to do? That's the only time I want to hear a no in a story, right? So what I've said is, here's your situation. Here's the things you're dealing with. Here's what I've heard you tell me. And if we can find a way to just do this, you'll be in a position so that you can. That makes sense? That's just a 4-part story. We're just making sure we're telling that story to them. And if you use this as a paraphrasing and reframing tool, it's going to make it really, really powerful for you. And like I said, this is the book, What Great Salespeople Do, that this is based off of. But you can use this in a whole bunch of different ways. So types of stories you can look at. Let's look at these. Your why. So maybe you want to tell them, why are you doing this? You know, before I got started with this, I was dealing with this, this, and this. And what I realized is these were my challenges that I was faced with. And I realized if I could just find a way to do this, I'd be able to do this. So now what I've decided to do, it looks like this so that I can do these things to help people do these things. Does that make sense, right? Your company. You know, when we got started, here's what we were dealing with. We found that in the market, these things were happening. We kept butting our head up against this. And so every time we saw that challenge, we said, what if there was a better way to do that? And so between me and somebody else, we ended up deciding to build this company. And what we found is that if we help people do this thing, the aha moment we had was like this. And once we got started, we realized, these other challenges come in. So we had a second aha. See how now we're stacking stories. And now what we've realized is that this is going like this. We've helped people do these things. This is the new reality we're in. And now we're in a position to do this stuff. That's how we're going to tell the company story. And then, of course, as we've mentioned, you can use the same technique to talk about how you've helped other customers and any kind of conceptual agreement. So you can use this if you're even sending an email. We've used this before. We say, hey, now before we put a price on the thing that we're trying to sell, let's get a conceptual agreement. Let me send you something that makes sure that I have your story correct. Once that's agreed upon by you and your team, then I'll put together a proposal that's going to meet all those needs. Sound good? Great. Now you can send that conceptual agreement to paraphrase everything you've done, and they're going to share it with their team because it's a story about who? About them. And now all of a sudden that team goes, wow, these guys really understand us. Let's work with them because they get what we're trying to do. See, storytelling is going to allow you to communicate to your customer that you get them, okay? So conceptual agreement, this is what that means, is premature discussion of fees, options, deliverables can lead to objections, loss of the sale. So conceptual agreement is basically this: objectives, measures, and value. And I remember learning this from Alan Weiss from $1 Million Consulting. And all you're trying to do is to say, hey, let's just make sure we're clear on what we're trying to do, how we're going to measure it, the value that's created, and tell them their story in this way so they go, yes, that is 100% what we are trying to do. That's where we're at, where we're trying to go, and you've nailed it on the head, what we need to solve today and long term. So conceptual agreement is a really powerful tool. Let's go into this. So this is the piece here. Show them that you respect their time and you can articulate their situation and needs quickly. What does that mean? That means that if you can get good at using storytelling and paraphrasing, they're on the fly in front of a customer following this framework, that they can see any other challenges they might throw at you. You probably have a good ability to succinctly help them understand what's going on and what's possible. Okay? And that's, again, why are you doing what you're doing? This is the big thing when you talk about, if you ever heard of Simon Sinek, the Golden Circle, this is what he talks about. Nobody wants to know what you do. They want to know why you do it. So build stories into everything you're talking about. And when you're networking, people are going to ask you, what do you do? Try and bring in your story and tell them why you do it. And so that's why I brought up Simon Sinek. People don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. So I want you to think about this for yourself. What is your story, right? Help them see why you're doing what you're doing, before, during, and after, right? Show them it's more than a product or price, and be someone they want to share a story with, okay? So let me talk about that. Let's go back up for a sec. When you tell stories and you're thinking about the mirroring and the neural coupling, when you share your story, it shows them that you're somewhat vulnerable. And when you show your vulnerability by sharing stories, you use that vulnerability as a strength. So basically, when you go first, you give them permission to share. In sales, we're trying to get people to answer questions. We're trying to be able to give us permission to ask more questions. So when you use storytelling, when you use emotions, when you use this thought process, you're opening up a dialogue for them to want to share more with you, and now you can connect on shared values. Now, I know the last couple slides here we went through quickly. I really wanted you to focus on this piece here. Okay, I want you to think about these 4 pieces. So when you're talking to someone, when you're going through your roadmap, really remember, what's the situation? Let me really ask enough questions to understand what's going on. Let me ask more of those implication questions to figure out, why is it happening? Who's involved? What are the bottlenecks? How much time does that cost? Okay, so it sounds like if we can find a way to do this, right? Now we'll be able to do this. I totally get it, which now we're in a position to present our offer. We're going to ask for commitment. So storytelling is a really, really powerful tool in a lot of different ways. I hope that makes sense for you. And I want you to start to apply this. Just use this 4-part structure before you start to just go through and wing things. And I know for me, I usually am able to do this pretty quickly now because I practice this a lot. Just remember these 4 pieces and hope that helps. Go start telling some stories. Hey, this is Joe Girard with Change Your Own Chief. Thanks for checking this out. Remember to subscribe and check out some of the other videos and resources we have. You know, as a sales coach, I spend a lot of my time just helping people be less weird and more human with their customers. If we can help you and your high-performing team, reach out to us, let us know, and let's connect soon.